Lewisburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that we replace the majority report with the minority report.
Is there a second? Is there any discussion? Representative Guggisberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, the minority report amendments to Senate Bill 2008 are as follows. Along with the health insurance premium changes and all the appropriations bills, the amendment adds from the Senate version 3 hazardous liquid safety inspectors and the relating operating expenses. Funding in this amendment is also removed from the Senate version for an FTE in the weights and measures inspections and operating expenses that accompany that, and a $50,000 decrease in travel expenses. What the amendment does not show, and which is in the majority report, is the removal of the funding for the State Rail Safety Inspection Program. This program would be comprised of 3 positions, 2 inspectors for the examination of railroad tracks and operating equipment, and 1 position to manage the program. This program would allow North Dakota to join 30 other states in creating and running a rail safety inspection program. In fact, 30 to 40% of all rail safety inspectors in the United States are inspectors employed by the state in which they work. These inspectors would supplement the Federal Rail Safety Inspection Program currently in place with the Federal Rail Administration by working with them to enhance their program. Currently, the FRA has 2 of its 10 employees in the state covering rail and operating equipment. These 2 inspectors are not only responsible for the tracks and equipment in North Dakota, but also inspect tracks and equipment in parts of Montana and South Dakota. According to the Energy Information Administration, crude by rail has increased by 133% since 2010. Yet federal safety resources have not been increasing anywhere near these levels. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, I believe this is our last chance for this body to send a message that we are serious about rail safety. After the Castleton rail accident, many people became even more concerned about the safety of our rail system in North Dakota, and the data backs their concerns. North Dakota has the 5th largest number of main line accidents in the nation and leads the nation in damages per accident. But specifically with the accident in Castleton, there were preventable causes and actions taken after the accident that helped to mitigate the damage. This accident was caused by a grain car leaving the tracks because of track failure. When these train wheels make contact with the track, they are resting on a part of the track that is about the size of a quarter. When this train left the track, it collided with a crude oil train heading in the opposite direction. This caused a fire and successive explosions of tank cars filled with crude oil. In a heroic act, the crew on the train carrying the crude oil used both members and was able to disconnect the undamaged part of the train and pull it free from the fire. Then, members of the first response community worked to mitigate the situation and protect the members of the neighboring communities. So, let's work backwards in this accident. Right now, as the budget sits, there's a removal of $3 million in grants to first responders for rail safety training in the Adjutant General's budget right now. That would have assisted them in preparing for tragic events like this. The vast majority of rail running through our state goes through communities protected by volunteer responders. These responders did not ask for more responsibilities, but there's now more expected of them, without additional state resources. We also had an opportunity to ensure there would always be 2 people staffing these trains, in the case that an additional set of hands was needed to assist in an accident. We failed to pass that legislation as well. In fact, we missed the opportunity just to require reporting of accidents in our state. This is the last chance we have to show the citizens of North Dakota that the House of Representatives is serious about rail safety. By accepting the minority report, we will have funded this program and put resources in place. And the funds already exist. The railroad industry currently pays $2.5 to $3 million annually in taxes on the fuel they use. $970,000 of this $5 to $6 million in revenue biennially would more than cover the cost of this state rail safety program. This is probably why the industry does not oppose these new regulation positions. This service will help with the frequency and reliability of the inspection process. They're already paying the tax, they're just not getting services. Also, along with the rail safety program, the minority amendment would add 3 hazardous liquid safety inspectors and a natural gas inspector to the roles at the Public Service Commission. I think we can all agree that the safe, secure pipelines would be the preferred method of transporting our Bakken crude. These hazardous liquid pipeline inspectors are needed to deal with the increase in crude traveling through pipelines in our state. The PSC testified that from 2011 to 2013, the miles of pipeline carrying crude oil has increased from 45.5 miles to 653 miles. And they're adding an additional 2,500 miles of pipeline per year. So if we want the landowners of our state to feel secure with these pipelines crossing their lands, we should help them feel safe by increasing the oversight. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, we've all read the press releases and op-eds lately. The Governor, the Public Service Commission, and the Director of Oil and Gas Division have very publicly made statements promoting these programs. It's our turn to join them, pass the minority report, and show North Dakota that the House of Representatives takes seriously the safety of the transportation of oil and other gases in our state. This is a modest proposal, and it's all we have left. So let's get all aboard and pass the minority report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Striley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I'd hope we'd reject the minority report. As was mentioned, there is 10 positions, FRA, federal positions. 2 of them are full-time, 8 part-time, operating in some states. Let me go through what they are and where they're based. Operations practices in Bismarck, Hazmat Inspector, Minot, Rail Safety Specialist, Chief Inspector, Bismarck, Hazmat Inspector, Bismarck, Signal Inspector, Bismarck, Grade Crossing, Minot, Track Inspector, Bismarck, Track Inspector, Bismarck, Mechanical Inspector, Bismarck, Track Integrity Inspector, Bismarck. Those are 10 positions. Granted, some of those, yes, do operate in parts of South Dakota and Montana, but they've in the last number of years doubled the amount of inspectors. BNSF, for example, also has 30 full and part-time positions dealing with traffic inspections. The people who have the most to lose in this, outside of if there was an accident in a large city, is the company. They lose millions of dollars per hour. So that safety is their number one concern. They have also stepped up to the plate in 35 miles an hour speed with crude oil trains through larger communities. They're transitioning their customers to the DOT 111 cars, which the feds will be issuing regulations on. It was supposed to be in March, now it's going to be in May. They're greatly going to enhance their electronic monitoring program, which is an essential piece to the safety of this, which will quickly identify tank cars that need repair, and if those are, if it indicates, they're going to be taking those out of service immediately. BNSF also will be investing $335 million in track maintenance and capital improvement projects in this year alone. There's high pressure release valves being talked about put on. Just April 1st, the oil conditioning and stabilization standards took effect. So, and that is at 13.7 PSI versus the national standard. So our standards are tougher than the national. There was concern in committee about the liability, albeit there hasn't been, in the states that have them, there hasn't been a major problem with that, but that was one of the concerns of ours, being the liability that the state would take on should an incident occur. It was mentioned, yes, 30 states do have a limited or expansive inspection programs. South Dakota and Wyoming, however, do not, which if you look in the duties of the federal inspectors, those are 2 of the major states that they share the duties with. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, as far as the natural gas piece to that, we did not fund that one position, and the reason was they're having a tough time retaining what they have now and filling one of the open positions. So what would be the point of adding another FTE there when they can't properly hold the position they have now? So we felt they should focus on getting that position hired as opposed to adding another one. So with that, Mr. Speaker, we had a good discussion. FRA was in for probably a couple hours talking about their program. In the private sector, I believe, always steps up to the plate. And in this case, in the press release from the governor's office, March 27th, listing the things that I had mentioned about what BNSF has done, and they've stepped up in a big way. And I guess I would repeat again, the person or the entity that has the most to lose in this is the company. Safety is a number one priority of theirs, and they certainly do not want any accidents for monetary reasons, for public perception reasons, for good business practice reasons. So I would hope that we would reject the minority report and accept the majority report without the inspectors.
Representative Wallman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would the previous speaker yield to a question?
Representative Striley, will you yield to question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Wallman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Striley, do you feel that the federal government working in North Dakota is doing a great job? Are they doing everything that needs to be done to keep our railways safe?
Representative Striley.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Wallman, for the most part, yeah, I would say, along with BNSF. Yes, there's been one accident that what was previously discussed, but there's accidents all over the nation. If you look at the amount of track, they're unavoidable. So there is going to be some accidents no matter what. And I guess the feeling was to add 2 more people on top of the 10, on top of the 30 that BNSF has already, isn't going to make that much of a difference, I guess, in my opinion. So what we have now, I think, with some of the changes that BNSF has agreed to do and the investments they're making in track additional inspections and maintenance, I think is more than enough to ensure that we have a real safe rail.
Representative Gugelsberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, just a few more comments to follow up. As far as the governor's press release and the information from BNSF, they are slowing down in communities. It's just one community. The city of Fargo is the only community that is affected by that reduction in speed. As far as the new rail car strengthening and the release valves on them is a great. It's a great move forward for the safety of those cars, but however, that does not prevent the accidents. And that's what these inspectors would do. They would check the tracks so we prevent accidents, not wait for the cars to fall off the rail and then try to deal with the problem afterwards. Of those 10 inspectors or Federal Rail Administration positions, only 2 of those do what this rail inspection program would do. So this would double the amount of people who are inspecting rails and the equipment that goes with the rails. And yes, BNSF is increasing investments in infrastructure. And it was a big dollar amount. I don't know what they invested the year before and what that dollar amount means. That's good. But in the governor's press release where he mentioned that, he didn't finish the press release by saying, so I don't think we need to go forward with this rail safety program. He finished the press release talking about how the state is going forward with the rail safety program. Again, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, every other bill we've had so far, including budgets that are coming up, have cut all of the funding and language for rail safety that has come through this body. This is our last chance. Let's pass this minority report, replace the majority report, pass the budget, and send it to the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Mock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the carrier of the majority report yield to another question?
Representative Striley, will you yield to question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Mock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to the representative is looking at and listening to his defense of the majority report without the amendment or with the removal of this program. He referenced the work done by Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and I wasn't at the hearing, and forgive my ignorance, but we know that there's 2 major railroads that operate in North Dakota. Could the previous speaker explain the difference in what the other railroad, Canadian Pacific, CP Rail, is doing to mitigate some of these risks? What are they doing towards rail safety? And whether one railroad is carrying a certain percentage of certain commodity loads in North Dakota. I'd just like a little more background on that, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Striley.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mock, we did not get into details on that particular company. I don't know the exact amount of investment they're going to do, but it's very clear that BNSF carries the majority of it. So specifically what that company is, I don't have a detail on the dollar amount of investment, but all these companies have heard the calls from the governor, from the Federal Rail Administration, from the Secretary of the MSA to step up their programs, and they have stepped up their programs, and they are going to step up their programs this year.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the previous speaker yield to one more question?
President Striley, will you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Mock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my next question to the carrier, he referenced that Burlington Northern has issued a reduction in speed of hazardous cargo traveling through large communities of 100,000 people or more. As the carrier of the minority report explained, this only applies to the city of Fargo in North Dakota. Does the carrier of the majority report know of any instances where railroads have been increasing speeds by which freight is traveling through communities in the state?
Representative Striley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mock, no, I do not. You clearly do, but no, I do not know that. They are, where the product is, especially coming into Minot, being I live there, it's slow coming in. I mean, these communities, this is just one particular example where they've slowed it even slower than they have in the distant or the short past year. So no, if you know that, enlighten the body, please.
Representative Mock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the previous speaker's confidence in my awareness on rail safety and or railroad speeds. Mr. Speaker, I guess the reason I bring that up is over the last several months, I've been reading the newspaper and news regarding railroad traffic, and of course, North Dakota is at the epicenter of the oil and gas industry, and how we transport these commodities to market is incredibly important. And we want to make sure that we're sending the right message. Of course, any narrative or any conversation regarding railroad traffic and safety has some application to all of our markets, whether it's the energy or the ag industry. And I recall a conversation, and our colleagues from District 15 could probably speak to this issue better than any, where CP Rail was ordering the increase in rail speed through the community of Devil's Lake. And when you think of rail safety in general, this is not just about hauling any one commodity to market. This is about the entire industry of 100+ freight cars traveling through our communities. And as I look through some of the handouts, Burlington Northern Santa Fe travels through 128 different communities across the state. CP Rail travels through 43 different communities. I stand in strong support of the minority report because here we are relying upon 2 federal railroad inspectors to cover and inspect all of the lines across the state of North Dakota. And those 2 individuals are shared with our neighbors in Montana and South Dakota. Now, this is an important issue, and I believe that it is imperative that we put at least a modest investment. We have a modest investment into rail safety in North Dakota. And by adopting the minority report, we can send this bill to conference committee and make sure that we are doing everything we need to do to address railroad safety. Maybe this isn't the final version, but let's send the message that the House is going to stand on issues of railroad safety, that we're going to invest in these inspectors so that the 128 communities that haul freight through with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Rail, or the 43 communities that are the carriers of CP Rail, know that they have an additional layer of security and that those lines are safe. Mr. Speaker, I would conclude by respectfully disagreeing with the previous speaker, the carrier of the majority report, in that the companies have the most to lose. They have a sizable investment. There is no diminishing of that, and he is right that they have a lot on the line. But I'll tell you, if I'm a resident and living near a railroad track, I'd like to think that they may have just a little bit more skin in the game if a train comes off the track or there is an explosion or an incident. There is a lot of people that have skin in the game here, and it is not just the industry that is at risk. We have thousands, hundreds of thousands of residents, not just in North Dakota, but millions around the country that are relying on North Dakota to do the right thing. I think this is a good amendment. Let's adopt the minority report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Delzer.
Well, Speaker and members of the Assembly, I would hope we'd reject the minority report and adopt the majority report. There's a number of things. First place, let's take a look at what this would do. Would this guarantee any more safety? We would hope it would, but it wouldn't. Accidents are going to happen. That's unfortunate. Let's take a look at FTEs in general. We've looked hard at FTEs everywhere. We'll have a lot of issues coming up in conference committee. As far as conference committee, if we accept the minority report, then this issue's off the table. If we accept the majority report, it's still on the table. We can still discuss it. As far as CP Rail goes, my area where I live, Max, is a hub, and they've redone a lot of tracks going west and upgraded the tracks, and they may have increased the speed just slightly because of that. They don't move fast. They are unit trains. They're big trains. But in general, I think this is the right move now. Politically, it'd be great to say we're doing all we can for safety. But are we really increasing safety any? I don't know that we are. So I would hope we'd reject the minority report and adopt the majority report.
Representative Munson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure there's a whole lot else that I can add to this conversation, but we did talk a lot about the new technology and the safety that goes with some of that. Just a few of the things. They have heat sensors now that as the cars go by, they check the heat coming from the bearings. If there's a bad bearing in a car, it'll show up in a blizzard, it'll show up in the middle of winter. No matter where they go, as they go past that, they're checked every once in a while. Those heat sensors can far out inspect what one person covering thousands of miles of track and thousands of cars in this state can do. Technology is advancing, leaps and bounds. Representative Striley mentioned the new tank cars that are being put in place. When we had the FRA folks in, they told us about how they run a current through the track in front of the train. And if there's a crack in the train, in the track, the electric current can't pass through it. So they are alerted to the fact that there's a broken track in there. Doesn't always fix the problem because it could crack as they go over the top of it. It could be perfect, look like a perfectly safe track. An inspector going over the top of that track would never know the difference, but if there happens to be a brittle spot in that track when the train goes over the top and it bounces, it can snap the track right there, and that's going to cause a derailment, very likely. An inspector would never even see that, never know that. So technology is way beyond what another set of eyes looking at some track. And you think of the thousands of miles of track in the state, one person can't, added to this list of inspectors, can't possibly have a big impact. Let technology take care of it. We have in our area lots of new track that's been put in. We have both CP and BNSF that service areas in my district. They have invested millions of dollars putting in new heavier track, heavier gauge. They are improving their service. They're able to go faster because of the new track. And we don't have any oil in my district, so it's all grain going, but they are making great strides. 2 more people, 3 more people inspecting. Actually, one of these is an office person, as we understood. One is supposed to monitor track, and one is supposed to monitor the wheels and the equipment. We just felt that with all the new inspectors that BNSF has added, all the new technology, we just said, this is little or no benefit. The last thing I want to bring up is what would really make oil transport safer? Pipelines. XL Pipeline, had it been not vetoed, probably would have been the safest thing we could have done in all the oil transport. So, reject the minority report, accept the majority report, and like Representative Delzer said, we can look at it in conference committee if we need to.
Representative Onstead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, I respect the last few comments that have been made about railroad safety. And number one is, if we adopt this, there's no guarantees. Okay, don't adopt it. And so then, what's going to happen? That's like saying, why should we have highway patrolmen? Because there's still going to be accidents out on the highway. Fact of the matter is, we're asking this make a step forward and this try and make this difference. Railroad safety. Those trains driving through Devil's Lake they're going 50 miles an hour right now. Outside the tractor at 60. So if they're slowing down any and the communities are asking to slow down, I don't think it's quite happening. That CP rail that goes through Max comes through my hometown too. They're less than 25 miles an hour, and now they've asked to go to 45. The cities on that same track have been asking PSC, can we lower the speeds of that track? They said they don't have any control of that. You got to go to the federal inspector. They've gone to the federal inspector. It's like trying to pull teeth to get them lower because they're concerned about the safety of that particular track. If the technology is so advanced, you tell me where all that technology is at on that track. It might be available, but how long is it going to take for that technology to be put in place? Is it available right now in North Dakota? Maybe we can say, yeah, it's here. It's probably in 2 or 3 spots. But we're talking an area of oil traffic carrying the tracks going. We used to get 1 freight train a week. Now they're having 2 a day on that same track. Those same numbers are in every track in the state of North Dakota, increasing those numbers. And so to say, okay, let's just don't do anything because there's no guarantee, well, I don't think that's very acceptable to say to those people that live alongside those tracks in those communities. I really think we need to accept this minority report and take the step in the right direction forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Carlson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping Representative Onstead wouldn't get up, then I wouldn't have to respond. But what don't we understand here about interstate commerce? How about the coal that passes from the Powder River Valley every day and passes through North Dakota? This is about interstate commerce. Interstate commerce that we do not regulate. The federal government regulates those trains that pass through our state. And they have laws in place, they have safety inspectors in place, and if we send out 3 inspectors, who's in charge? Are we in charge, or is the federal government in charge? My argument would be the federal government's in charge. Now, they might let us work with them, but are they going to let us shut down the rail line in North Dakota on interstate commerce? I don't think so. Nobody wants an accident. Everybody wants safety. Any one of these is an unfortunate incident that happens. Representative Munson hit it on the head. Technology is advancing every day. Advancing every day. There are trains and there are people driving in front of these trains and inspecting these tracks before these trains even go down the road or down the track. I think that we need to sometimes separate emotion and politics from policy. And I don't believe that this is a solution to the problem. I think that the federal government, had they stepped up, for 3 years they've had a new design of a rail car that's safer, and they haven't done anything. You know who made the safer rail car? The industry themselves, because they wanted it safer on the rail. So if we want to point fingers, let's point fingers at the people in charge. And that's the people that haven't been doing the safety things they should have on design of cars. They wait for an incident to happen and they react. We want safe rails in North Dakota, but I think the minority report should be rejected and the majority report should be passed, because if we remember what stage we're at in the session, there's still a lot of discussion left on this issue.
Is there further discussion? Representative Mock?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I only rise, and I don't recall if a roll call vote has been requested on this. I believe a verification vote would be the vote.
A roll call vote is required under Rule 602-2.
Just wanted to clarify, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Representative Gugelsberg?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I just have to rise to correct a few things here. First of all, the technology is improving, but they need people to run this equipment. They're not drones. People need to go out with this equipment to inspect the rails. The XL pipeline, even if it was approved, we're talking about inspectors for this upcoming biennium, not 10 years from now. That won't help things. And also there is inspectors in here for hazardous liquid inspectors. The federal government, this body, time and time again, I've seen legislation talking about our sovereignty, wanting the federal government to stop spending, balance the budget. But then we want them to invest more in inspecting our railroad tracks in our state. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I think if we want states' rights, we want states' sovereignty, we also need to understand that we have to have state responsibility. We need to pass this minority report and start this safety program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Emma Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. We tend to think of the spill at Castleton and the explosion as a one-time occurrence. But that stretch of track had derailment after derailment after derailment before the explosion took place. We know beyond a reasonable doubt that the programs in place are not working. You might think with all the technology to detect broken rails, and with the people running ahead of the rails, that when they find a broken rail, they quit running. They do not quit running. They continue to run on the broken rail. Their standards internally are weak. They're running on broken rails. We need people there at the table to oversee this. This would be beneficial to the railroads. This would help protect the people of North Dakota, and this would protect our oil industry. When I was in California this winter, Bakersfield, California stopped an unloading facility for rail. Spokane, stopping our trains from going through a tunnel. Every wreck threatens our entire oil industry. It threatens this entire state's budget. And we're sitting here arguing about $1 million. let's be real. Let's take the politics out of this and protect the people of North Dakota and the businesses in North Dakota. Let's vote for the minority report.
Is there further discussion? The question is on the motion of Representative Guggisberg that the minority report be substituted for the report of the majority. A recorded roll call vote will be held. If you vote green, you vote to accept the minority report. If you vote red, you vote to reject the minority report. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? The clerk will close the key and take the record. The final vote shows 35 yea, 58 nay, 1 absent not voting. The minority report is rejected. The House will be on the 14th order of business. The House has before it Senate Bill 2008, which has been read. Mr. Chief Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, engrossed Senate Bill 2008 with House amendments and the majority report was introduced by the Appropriations Committee at the request of the Governor. Engrossed Senate Bill 2008 is a bill for an act to provide an appropriation for defraying the expenses of the Public Service Commission to amend and reenact Section 49-01-055 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to the salary of the Public Service Commissioners, to authorize a transfer, to provide a retroactive application, and to declare an emergency. Mr. Speaker, your Appropriations Committee majority report recommends amendments as follows, and when so amended, recommends do pass. Mr. Speaker.
Representative Stradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I'll go through some of the changes. Obviously, the rail piece was taken out of the majority report. Then one natural gas inspector was also taken out, as well as the weights and measures. And the reason being, like was previously discussed, they're having a heck of a time keeping the position now, so adding a new one just didn't seem appropriate at this time. The weights and measures, last session, they had requested that we remove this position and repurpose it and go to a more of an overview, one person throughout the state. Now they're back this session asking it to be added back in. We just felt that allowing them to stay in the oversight role another biennium and see how it works out and not add this position back in that we just took out last session. There was a $50,000 removed for travel expenses, mainly related to the removal of the positions. Without the positions, there's less travel needed. There was the the healthcare piece adjustment to it. We left in what the Senate had on the litigation piece to this of $900,000. That's been there for many bienniums. So with that, Mr. Speaker, not much else changed but the rail and the removal of the other two positions. So we'd ask that you support the bill.
Is there any discussion? The House has before it for final consideration Senate Bill 2008. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Representative Brandenburg? Do any members wish to change their vote? The key will be closed and the clerk will take the record. The final vote shows 75 yea, 18 nay, 1 absent not voting. Senate Bill 2008 is declared passed. The House will be on the 12th